Welcome back to BIMteriors, Revit for interior designers. And today we're going to be going over the Copy Monitor tool. So what is that tool and why it's so important to us? So as interior designers, a lot of the time we're linking in architectural models, structural models that have these grids and levels. And in the past, using softwares like CAD or maybe even just Revit, and you weren't using this workflow, you would create these grids. You would create these levels, or you'd use them as references. But throughout the life cycle of the project, as we make progress, we get new models and new backgrounds, and we've got to update them. And a lot of the time, and maybe your consultants are different, sometimes we wouldn't get notified what's been changing. It's just, here's the new background, and there you go. And we would spend hours on end trying to understand, okay, this grids have moved. Grid A, grid B, grade 1, 2, 3 have moved, but where are they moving? What were they previous? And it was a lot of time spent coordinating, and same with levels, where this tool allows us with first a click of a button to create all these elements and then match them and kind of copy and sync them to the architect or structural, depending where you're copy monitoring these grids and levels from. But the best part is throughout the life cycle of the project, if things are changing, when we do get those model updates and our consultants don't tell us, the great thing about this tool is that we can run a coordination review and it will flag to us what's changing from what we originally had it to. So if your grids are moving, your levels are moving, this impacts our scope significantly. And we want to know if these columns are coming into our space, if we had a feature around that column, or maybe our slab to slab height is changing on our levels, and that's affecting your reflected ceiling plan, your ceiling design. So all of these tools are super helpful to be able to flag if this are changing and we're not being notified by our consultants. At least Revit's smart enough to be able to flag this to us. So this week we're going to be going over the Copy Monitor tool, and we'll jump right into it. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it of where does the Copy Monitor tool exist? How do we use it? And why is it so important? So if we take levels, we'll start with levels and then we'll do that exact same workflow and go with grids. And why would it be impactful to this view? So if I'm looking at this, again, this is a residential house, so it wouldn't have a whole lot of levels. But if you're thinking of a residential tower, it's got 40 plus stories, having to go through and create levels and name them and make sure that they're in sync with either the architecture or the structural engineer, that's a lot of work. And that's way too much work for me. And there's got to be a way more efficient way of doing this. And there is. A lot of the times too is that we want to create these levels and these grids because maybe we want to apply our studio standards to these annotation symbols rather than potentially what the arc or structural consultants may have. Also, potentially we want to maybe control what this looks like, how far they go out, where if that's a link, I don't have that control. So if you're looking for this, this is also a great tool to create these and why you're creating these. But it's also nice to have as well because we can now utilize a copy and monitor, meaning if the consultants are changing levels, they're changing grids, they're not always notifying us of what they're changing. Or maybe they're like, yes, we changed this, but they're not actually telling us what grids, by how much. And this can actually have a huge impact on our scope. And a tool like this will keep us in the know at all times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this here. So I'm going to show you the use of if a level is already created, how do you monitor it to a level that you want it to monitor to? But if you don't have those grids created and you don't want to spend those times and find a more efficient way of doing it with a click of a button, I'm going to show you that as well. So at the top of your ribbon at the Collaborate tool, you can find that under the Collaborate ribbon, there's an area called Coordinate, and you'll find your Copy/Monitor tool. Now, when you select that, it's going to ask Use Current Project or Select Link. So we're going to want to grab these grids and levels from the link. So we want to make sure that we're selecting the link and selecting anywhere on that specific link. So just make sure that if that's the architecture model you're trying to grab, you're selecting that specific link and not something else. So now we've gone into another ribbon of the Copy and Monitor tool. And you can see here we've got a copy option and a monitor option. And so what that does is potentially I'm going to grab my level 1 and I'm going to move this down so it's matching the ARC's level 1. But if something moves, if something changed, we're still not being notified. So if you do have levels and grids already created, but you now want to monitor it to your consultant models, this is where you can then use the monitor tool to select on it. You can then select your element, so grid or level that you want to select. So in this case here, our level, and monitor it to the arcs. And in that case here, now we're getting this beautiful little heartbeat monitor. So what that's saying is that if you move that by accident, or if your consultants are moving that the next time you upload their model, you're going to get notified that maybe they move level 1 up and down by a set distance, and you're going to get actually flagged. So in this way here, if that's going to have a drastic impact on your scope, you now know of it and you can adjust accordingly. So once that's done, once you've created that, make sure that you hit finish. Now we're going to use that tool of maybe we don't have levels, we don't have grids created in our model, and I don't want to go through that whole process of doing that manually because that's a lot of work, and I'd rather do it with a click of a button. So under the same tab, under the same tool, making sure that we're selecting the link, you can now hit copy. So the copy, what that's going to allow us to do is create a copy of anything we select. Now you can go one by one by one. Again, I like to use the most efficient way of doing things. So by selecting multiple, I can actually select everything. And what that's going to allow us to do is we can actually filter of anything that we can potentially copy and monitor in this project from that linked model. So you can see there is a bunch. Now, what I will flag to you is that if I were to copy and monitor all these walls, it's going to create these walls, those wall types, and then also monitor them. And that's not what we're going to want. Maybe for some feature walls, you might want that, and that might be useful. But for the most part, we really only want levels and grids as interior designers. So what I'm going to do is check none. And in this example, we're really focusing on the levels, and I'm going to hit OK. So what that does is I've now selected them. This is where we've got the small finish followed by the big finish. Because if I came here and just selected on, I call this the big finish, it didn't run any of the commands, because what we've done is we've selected them, but we haven't actually created and finished from that selection. So if we hit on the small finish, what it's now doing is it's creating a level and naming it and putting it in the same position as the link. So in this case here, our architectural model. So you can see here, it's created those, fantastic. And it's also not just created it, but monitored it. So moving forward, if things are changing, if we move it by accident or the architect's moving it, we will be notified. So if you hit escape, we can now at this point hit the big finish. And now we've created all these levels. So I can see here, I now have a copy of all of these levels, and I now have the ability and the control to be able to, have a bit more flexibility and control of what this is looking like to more suit the views that you need created. I'm going to now go to a plan view, and this same workflow will happen with grids. You might want to control what these grids look like more to your studio standard with your annotation symbols, and maybe even the way they crop and the way they show, if that's coming in from a link. So if we go to level 1, I don't have an opportunity, like I can select this, but that's as much control as I have, where I might want to create these, but not even just to have control of what they look like in your views. It's such a great tool to utilize as your consultants are changing these are typically tied to structural columns, shear walls, that have a huge impact on, if these are moving, that might really impact your scope of work. So great tool to kind of act as a almost safety net. Is if elements are getting changed, you're always in the know. And then this way here, you can quickly review to see, is this change actually impacting your scope? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but now you have access to a tool such as this. So we're going to repeat this same workflow so that you can kind of get used to it. We're going to use the copy monitor, select on the link. So we're going to select on that link. We're going to copy because we don't have any of these grids created yet. I'm going to hit multiple because, as we all know now, we like to do it the most efficient way. Before I hit finish, making sure that you do filter out what you are selecting. So I'm going to hit none. And in this example, just grids. Making sure that we hit on the small finish. So now it's creating all of those grids. And then once we've hit on the small finish, we now know that it's created the grid. It's also monitoring it. So if something does change, we are being notified. Making sure that we hit the big finish. And so you can kind of see here, now you have way more control of what these look like. But even that, you can actually apply your annotation standards as well so that they're showing up in your views the way that you need them to. Okay, so what I wanted to show before we end this week's session is what happens if things start to move and what will that look like and where do I even go to actually see if things have been moving? So right at the Collaborate tab, under your copy monitor where you created these elements to be able to create a copy and monitor to your consultant linked models, you will find coordination review. So if I were to select on the link, you'll see that it will bring you to a new window box, which actually has nothing there. There's no changes. There's nothing out of sync from the levels and the grids that we've monitored from our architectural model. Now, this is always the goal, is to make sure that our grids and levels are always in sync. Now, if stuff are moving, what will that look like and what are your options? So for example, if I had an element that slightly moved. And I can see here, I just got a coordination monitor alert and that a grid has moved. So potentially a team member was looking at something over here on this portion of the plan and thought they were grabbing one of those families, one of those other detail components, but in fact, we're grabbing a grid. And they might have actually done it so fast where the error message came up and then went away very quickly. So they don't even know that they've moved this grid. Under the coordination review, now if I select on this and select on the actual link, I now have something that's come up. And so I can see here that there are a message. There's a new / unresolved. So under grids, and it says maintain relative position of grid, and I can maximize this so I can see that grid 2, so if I come over here, has slightly moved. So Revit is smart enough so that this way here, internally, but also externally, we use this so that as the architects, as structural engineers, as they start to progress their project, maybe their grids move, maybe their levels move, and we will always want to be in the know. And this is such a useful tool because if those elements are changing, there's going to be an impact on our scope, and this will tell us how big and how minor. So if I grab on this, so I know that grid 2 over here has moved. I have action category. So if I select and drop this down, I can postpone, meaning like, I just don't know about this just yet. I'm going to postpone it. I can reject it and say, no, I'm okay with this difference, but also accepting the difference, meaning like I made this change or they've made this change and I'm actually okay with it. At the end of the day, you're always going to want to move it back to where it was because we're not the ones dictating where these levels or grids are, and they're coming from our consultants. So you can say 99% of the time, there might be an instance or two where you might hit one of the other 3 options, but for most of the time, you're going to want to modify the grid. You're going to want to move it back to where it is. So if I hit apply, you can see now there is no coordination review elements or messages, and our grids are back in sync. That is a wrap on the Copy Monitor tool. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of what this tool is and how to utilize it, and that hopefully will actually impact the way you coordinate, collaborate with your consultants. So as they're making changes, as they're progressing their models, and as they're sharing that with you, and potentially they're not notifying you what's been changing, this tool is a tool that's going to kind of allow you to be in the know at all times. If you're hearing this message, it means that you've listened to the new content all the way to the end. And for that, I thank you. Please like and subscribe now to gain access to Revit content.